We are 13 days ahead of elections date, and we believe that the deep analysis is, without any doubt, much needed. AmCham Spain has been monitoring 25 US presidential elections since our start in 1917. This will be my fifth one as chairman of the entity. And I don't have to tell you, this is at least one of the crucial ones. I would also like to take the opportunity to remind AmCham Spain is a neutral entity, bipartisan, and our objectives are around investments, trade, research and development, and the like in all sectors, defending the interests of our 300 member companies, including largest multinationals, Spanish and American. What we have here, we have an expected world pandemic, including the quick recovery of President Trump, scary world recession. We have China. We have Europe and the Brexit in few months, few weeks from now. The vote by mail. The Black Lives Matters. The attempt to kidnap the governor of Michigan. The nomination of Connie Barrett for the Supreme Court. Deep different visions about society, about economy, about international relations, two candidates, two different views about the world, two styles and two energies. In sum, interesting times. We have here two experts, Amanda Mars, US Bureau Chief El País. Thank you, Amanda. I believe you are in the US, I don't know where, but we have also, last but not least, John Decker from Fox News, an old friend of AmCham Spain and one of the oldest journalists covering the White House, I think since 1995. Thank you, both of you. Aida Casamichana, the Executive Director of AmCham Spain, will introduce and moderate this debate. Thank you, Aida. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaime. Well, welcome everyone to this event on the US elections. And before we start, I just want to remind everyone that this event is going to be fully conducted in English and that participants may ask questions at the chat box that we will go over them after the speaker presentations. I also want to give a very warm welcome to our two speakers today, John and Amanda. Thank you very, very much for being with us here today. We know that you have a very, very busy agendas lately, and we're eager to hear from you and all what you have to tell us from this election. But let me quickly introduce you to our audience today. Amanda Mars is the US Bureau Chief at El País newspaper. She began her career in 2001 at Europa Press Newswire as an economy reporter in Barcelona. In 2006, she joined El País at the economy desk. In 2015, she was appointed New York correspondent and moved to Washington, D.C. in 2017. As a special correspondent, she has covered the International Monetary Fund meetings for several years. Yorgos Papandreou's resignation during the financial crisis in Greece and the debt crisis in Puerto Rico. She has also interviewed personalities like Madeleine Albright, Ben Bernanke, Carlos Slim, Mike Bloomberg, and several Nobel Prize economists. Welcome, Amanda. John Decker. John is the White House correspondent for Fox News Radio and has been a member of the White House Press Corps since 1995. In 2015, he was elected by his colleagues to the board of the White House Correspondents Association. He's also on the faculty of Georgetown University, where he's an adjunct lecturer, and he's also a member of the Washington, D.C. Bar. John has covered the Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump administrations, as well as 23 State of the Union addresses, 6 presidential elections, and the impeachment of President Clinton. He has been in the Supreme Court to cover some of the most important cases in the past 2 decades, including Bush versus Gore, NFIB versus Sebelius, and Windsor versus the United States. So John, Amanda, we're just 2 weeks from the elections in the middle of a global pandemic and with a very, very polarized society. And on top of this, and as Jaime was mentioning in his welcoming remarks, in the recent months and in the past weeks, there has been a lot going on with the Black Lives Movement, followed by the death of George Floyd, the news about the tax avoidance of President Trump, the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and the quick nomination of Judge Barrett for the Supreme Court, a very heated first presidential debate, and then finally, the president contracting COVID. So before we get into all the details of these matters, I would like to start by a general question to both of you. How is it to cover a presidential election in the middle of a pandemic? John, let's start with you.
Well, thank you, Ada, and thank you, Jaime, and thank you, AmCham Spain, for putting this great event together. It's a real honor to be with you, and I feel connected to you because I've done 2 prior events with AmCham Spain, and it's, as you can see, I have a bond with Spain. You see Rafa Nadal behind me, and I'm so happy he won yet another Grand Slam at the French Open at Roland Garros. So to your question, Ada, it's unique because typically we're out on the road with the campaigns, we're meeting and talking to voters, we're out and about in diners and restaurants, in bars, and talking to prospective voters. And because of the pandemic, a lot of that is just so difficult. I typically would be covering the president every day of the week. Now I'm limited in terms of the amount of time that I go out with the president. You should know that every time that I enter the White House complex, which is a few times a week, I get tested for coronavirus. Every time I travel with the president on Air Force One, I get tested for coronavirus, fortunately always negative. But it makes it that much more difficult. And I'll give you an anecdote that a friend of mine, I used to work at Reuters, and a good friend of mine still works at Reuters. He's their chief White House photographer. And he has told his bosses at Reuters he doesn't want to go out on the road. He's too concerned about his health because at some campaign rallies in particular, the people that attend those rallies generally don't socially distance themselves. They don't wear masks. And as a result, it's one of those situations where you may be putting your health at risk. So it's quite different than what we normally do. We have the second and final presidential debate happening tomorrow night in Nashville, Tennessee. And that's an opportunity, obviously, for President Trump to try to change the narrative, try to change the dynamic. This is an event in which literally hundreds of journalists typically would be in Nashville covering this particular event, but because of COVID, it just makes it that much more difficult. So hopefully, Ada, I answered your question well.
Thank you, John. Amanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you, the American Chamber of Commerce in Spain, for inviting me for this. I'm honored to talk with you. And right now I talk to you from Wilkes-Barre, which is a beautiful small town in Pennsylvania. And it belongs to Lucerne County, which is one of those crucial counties that 4 years ago went from blue to red, meaning it went from voting for President Obama to electing President Trump. I've been around for 2 days talking with a lot of people, and I can see things are not like crystal clear for me. I think things are going to be very tight. And regarding the specific question, yes, it's difficult to report, but well, people is eager to talk. I can see the difference from covering politics in Spain or covering in the US, and a big difference here is that people like a lot to talk about politics. People is very open here. They don't fear exposing themselves. So yes, but at the same time, it's true, you have to take risk. especially if you go to, Trump events or Trump territory, people is not very mask-oriented, let's say, and they don't keep social distance. So at the end of the day, you want to bond with them, you want to take from them as much as you can, and at the end of the day, you are exposing a little bit yourself. And I think the crucial thing here in this election is what's going to be the game changer. And I think it's a very atypical election. This is not an issue-driven election anymore. I guess it has not been like this for a few years, but this time especially, because we cannot say it's the economy stupid anymore, because what can we say about the economy this time? Crisis is huge, but you cannot blame President Trump for that. Even a lot of people give him a lot of credit for the earlier growth, the tax cuts. The relief package worked pretty well, generally speaking. So it's not about the economy. It's not about the scandals, because, there has been a lot of news about the taxes, the Trump's taxes, but his voters have known him for many years, have known Donald Trump for many years. They expect that kind of stuff. And the scandals, Ukraine, Russia, sound very far away from people here. So I think there are two game changers in this election. The big one is the pandemic. That really affects people, daily life, and it's harming a lot of people. And for sure, pandemic is not President Trump's fault, but has been managed poorly from many people's points of view. And the second thing are the Democrats. Two things happened in 2016. One is that they were overconfident about polls. Not only the campaign was overconfident, but the voters, the Democratic voters, were overconfident. Many of them stayed home, didn't go to vote. And also the left wing of the party, those voters, Bernie Sanders supporters, many of them didn't vote either. Plus, some of them even voted for Trump. 4 years later, I think the feeling is different. And despite the fact Biden is a moderate, I think the left wing of the party is going to vote for him this time. So that's different. Even though everything is very tight, this election is going to be won by the margins, especially all of them are, but especially in a so polarized partisan election is going to be by margins. And margins are in places like this one. And what you feel here is that Trump is still winning with blue-collar workers, blue-collar voters, by large, maybe not as large as 2016, but his base hasn't widened. He hasn't tried that. He only has fight to keep his base. He hasn't widened it. Biden has tried to widen the base. He's putting, he's not doing America first, but he's saying made in America. He has put made in America in the center of his economic program. And he's so even trying to get some moderate Republican voters. So he still has a chance, of course, but it really depends of very few counties, and also about the turnout, the final turnout of Democratic people and left-wing people, because we have seen a lot of protest. We have seen Black Lives Matter protests. We have seen March of Women. We have seen climate marches. We have to see how much of it translates into a turnout. So I will leave it here, and I will take questions.
Thank you, Amanda. Well, taking the chance that you're in Pennsylvania, Former President Obama is doing today, as far as I know, his first in-person event with a drive-in rally in Philadelphia. So Pennsylvania, it's a very important swing state that ends, as you said, to be Democratic, where Obama won in 2012, but then turned to Trump in 2016. So how are the pollings in the battleground states going? And this question is for both of you.
I think in this one specifically, it's 7 points lead by Biden as for today in the average. I think it was 7, and I think that the tightest battleground, and there's the big fight there, is Florida, where I think that the gap is only 1 point, supposed to be for Biden, but I think Florida will be won by President Trump.
Yeah, let me take over if I may. So Pennsylvania, as Amanda said, is a state that up until 2016 had historically voted for the Democratic nominee for president. So the last time a Republican had actually won Pennsylvania before President Trump in 2016 was George H.W. Bush in 1988. And what Donald Trump managed to do in Pennsylvania and also in Michigan and Wisconsin was to essentially turn back history because those other two states as well, Michigan as well as Wisconsin, had traditionally voted for the Democratic nominee. Each of those three states, however, were states that the president won by less than 1 percentage point. Very close elections. And obviously, Democrats learned lessons from mistakes that they made in 2016. Hillary Clinton, for instance, after she became the Democratic presidential nominee in 2016, never even visited Wisconsin. She just sort of took it for granted. She assumed that it would go Democratic, just like it did for Barack Obama in 2008 and 2012, and she didn't need to invest her time or her resources in Wisconsin. In Michigan and in Pennsylvania, Hillary Clinton, unfortunately, did not increase the margins that she needed to do in the large cities of Philadelphia and its suburbs and Detroit and its suburbs. And as a result, President Trump in both of those states overwhelmed the advantages that she built up in Philadelphia and in Detroit. And so the lessons that Democrats learned are being applied to this election cycle. And as a result, Democrats are more mobilized over the course of the past 4 years. Democrats have registered more voters than Republicans in the state of Pennsylvania. They've registered more Democrats than Republicans in the state of Michigan. And I think that those two states in particular, from the way that I view those particular states, are likely to flip. I believe that Joe Biden will win Pennsylvania 2 weeks from today. And I also believe that he'll win the state of Michigan 2 weeks from today. And I agree with Amanda, what she said about Florida. Despite polls indicating that Joe Biden may have a slight lead over Donald Trump as we head into Election Day, I think that Florida leans Republican. And it will be in President Trump's column ultimately when the votes are ultimately counted. That's not to say that he doesn't have a fight on his hands. He continues traveling to Florida. Over the course of the past 5 weeks, he's traveled to Florida every one of those weeks. He'll be there this week as well, and he'll be there over the course of the next 13 days several times just to lock up his support in those particular states. So what you are looking at, from my point of view, despite what is sometimes presented on television, is a very close election that ultimately could boil down to one state determining who wins the 2020 election, just like one state determined who won the presidential election in 2000. That was the state of Florida. And in 2004, one state determined who won that presidential election. That was the state of Ohio. George W. Bush won the state of Ohio, and as a result, he won re-election in 2004. So that's the way I generally see the electoral map shaping up with 13 days to go until election day.
Thank you. Now that we have you speaking about your thoughts about what the campaign will go, John, you have a forecasting model that already predicted Trump's victory in 2016. Can you explain how your model works, or what your prediction, what the prediction for these elections is?
Well, sure. That's the bottom line. What is going to happen? And you know, I do this forecast, and I've done it. I think almost every day. I look at the map to see whether it's changed, to see whether I need to make any changes on the map. And here's the interesting thing: both you and Jaime talked about all of the events that have happened in 2020. And let me quickly go through them chronologically, I'll go through them very quickly. At the very beginning of the year, there was impeachment. Then there was the coronavirus pandemic that happened not only in the United States, but around the world. The economic fallout of the coronavirus pandemic, the racial unrest in America, the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and a vacancy that needed to be filled on the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's not forget that the president, in the very beginning of this month, contracted coronavirus and fortunately has recovered. All of those events have happened in 2020. It's been a remarkable year. But in my opinion, even at the beginning of the year, before any of these events had taken place, most Americans had already decided how they were going to vote in this upcoming presidential election. They were either going to vote for President Trump, and they were excited to do so, or they were going to vote against President Trump because there's such a strong anti-Trump energy out there as well. And despite all of these events, I don't think it really changed that many votes for the most part. I think that the electoral map that I've put together really has remained unchanged over the course of the past 10 months. So to answer your question, in a relatively quick fashion, who will win? To me, if you look at the electoral map from 2016, which had Donald Trump beating Hillary Clinton with 306 electoral votes to Hillary Clinton's 232. This is a map that's going to look a little different. It's going to look a little different than that in 2020. And the reason it's going to look a little different is because of the so-called blue wall, the states which I mentioned, which have traditionally gone for the Democratic nominee. Donald Trump managed to blow past that blue wall in 2016. If we could go to actually the final slide that you have there, because it does give you a good sense about where I think things stand today. That would be great. It's the final slide, and that's it. That's the one. So this is the electoral map as I think it stands today. And as I mentioned to you earlier, I'm coloring in 2 states. So this is what it looks like before those 2 states are colored in. Donald Trump 260, Joe Biden 232. And that means that at this stage of the game, neither Donald Trump nor Joe Biden has reached 270 electoral votes, which is necessary to win the presidency. But I mentioned Pennsylvania and I mentioned Michigan. If you add 20 electoral votes to Joe Biden's total, that gets him to 252. And if you add Michigan's 16 electoral votes to Joe Biden's total, it gets him to 268. But still we have Joe Biden, 268, Donald Trump, 260, neither one of them hitting 270, with one state, Wisconsin, the decider. So just as Florida decided the election with 29 electoral votes in 2000, and Ohio with 18 electoral votes deciding the election in 2004, I believe that Wisconsin will be the deciding state in 2020. And it's a state that Donald Trump obviously won by less than 1 percentage point. It's a state that I looked this morning before our event, and I saw that the average of polls in Wisconsin has Joe Biden with a 6.3% lead over Donald Trump. But I don't think that polls are that average of polls is an accurate reflection of that particular state. Earlier today, I've been doing all kinds of events all day today. Earlier today, I spoke with a former congressman from the state of Wisconsin, knows the state very well, obviously, and he also does not believe that there's 6 points that separates Joe Biden from Donald Trump. It's much closer than that. And like all elections, whether you're talking about an election in Spain or an election in the United States, it all comes out to turnout. Which side can turn out their supporters more? And that's what Wisconsin's all about. Can Donald Trump turn out his supporters in greater numbers than Joe Biden can turn out his supporters in Wisconsin? That's what it all boils down to. Now, I'd like to make a definitive determination, in my view, as to who's going to win. So to me, it's almost a coin flip in terms of who's going to win Wisconsin. But if you flip that coin figuratively, 51 times out of 100, I think Joe Biden wins. And if you flip that coin 49 times out of 100, Donald Trump wins. That's how close I believe that state is. That's how close I believe this particular election is. And I would caution you that anytime you read or hear or see a national poll, don't pay any of attention to it. Those national polls are not relevant. They aren't. I have no doubt that Joe Biden is going to beat Donald Trump in the popular vote, just like Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump in the popular vote in 2016 by almost 3 million votes. Joe Biden may beat Donald Trump by 5 to 7 million votes in the popular vote, but that doesn't matter. That's not how we choose our president. And so to me, this is an electoral map that I believe will look pretty accurate once all the votes are counted after Election Day. I could be wrong. I wasn't wrong in 2016. But that being said, it's all about turnout. And if certain demographic groups come out in historic numbers, including Black Americans, it could change this map dramatically. It could mean possibly Joe Biden winning in Georgia or Joe Biden winning in North Carolina, which would make his election that much more likely. This electoral map is put together with a model assuming that we have the same type of turnout that we saw in 2016. No one can predict turnout. No one can predict turnout. You can guess, but that will ultimately determine who wins the 2020 election.
Thank you very much, John. Very interesting. A lot of information to process here. I want to connect this with the large number of mail-in ballots that have been processed already to this date. We heard this morning the numbers versus in 2016. In 2016, they were at this point 3 million in mail-in ballots. Today we have 35 million mail-in ballots already. So how this is going to be impacting the elections, and will we know the winner on November 3rd?
Well, I will answer that, but first I want to tell that I do encourage you to follow and pay attention to what John says, because I want to tell that last time we met in person, it was back in January. By then, Democratic primaries were about to begin, and we were in the middle of the impeachment trial. And I remember John saying, Joe Biden is going to win the primaries. And by then, it was not an easy thing to say, because there were as many as 20 candidates. And despite the fact that Biden was leading the polls, it was a small margin, and there were much more exciting candidates. People expected a lot from Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg. So it was not an easy thing to predict. Biden's win, and he did. And the second thing he said is, and forget impeachment. This election is not going to be about the impeachment. By summer, we will have forgotten impeachment. He was wrong because it was by March that we had already forgotten impeachment. So yeah, it's true. And regarding the votes, that's it. Many people, it's not that there are very few undecided people, that it's very few people who is still undecided, is that many people have already voted. And what are the possible consequences of this? So there's a worrisome scenario here. Is that we don't have a winner, a clear winner, November 3rd or November 4th in the morning, or even that we have a initial winner, but when the mail vote is counted, the picture changes and we have a different winner. And given President Trump is warning about a supposed risk of fraud, this can be very concerning. I think that's a risk.
And let me pick up with what Amanda just said and remind you of something that you may forget. And that was in 2000, America and the rest of the world didn't know who America's next president was going to be until December the 13th of 2000. So 5 weeks after Election Day, Al Gore conceded the election to George W. Bush. You may recall that was because the vote count in Florida was up in the air, and ultimately it was settled to a certain extent by the US Supreme Court. And America's been through this before. 5 weeks is a long time, but we were patient, and ultimately we had a peaceful transition of power, and George W. Bush was sworn in on January the 20th, 2001. But I do think that it is likely that we may not know the full results of the presidential election on November the 3rd or November the 4th, because as Amanda said, a record number of Americans are going to be voting and have been voting by mail-in balloting, which takes time. It takes time to count those ballots. It takes time to verify those ballots. And some states are prepared for that. Florida is prepared for that, for instance. Other states, it's new. And as a result, it may take time to go through all of those ballots and to confirm the results in those states. And so you have to be patient. Already we see Democrats and Republicans mobilizing lawyers ready to challenge the validity of mail-in ballots, perhaps, if need be, if the vote totals are very close in certain states. And just like in 2000, when those lawyers mobilized and went down to the state of Florida, that may happen again, but it may happen in other states, like the state of Wisconsin, if it's a really close race. So I would be prepared for that as well, in terms of getting ready for the idea that America and the world may not know who won on November the 3rd or November the 4th.
So, do you foresee that if, in the case that Biden wins the election, will there be a peaceful transition of power? This question is, of course, for both of you.
Well,
sorry.
No, I'll answer real quickly, Amanda, and give you an opportunity, obviously, as well. So let me answer it this way. President Trump has been asked the very same question that you asked me, and unfortunately did not give a definitive answer, which upset even members of his own party. So much so that the day after President Trump did not definitively say, of course, if I lose, I will preside over a peaceful transition of power for a Joe Biden presidency. The day after he did not confirm that, the leader of Republicans in the U.S. Senate, Mitch McConnell, he authored a resolution that was passed in the U.S. Senate, not just in a bipartisan fashion, it passed unanimously. And that resolution said there will be a peaceful transition of power in the United States. Whoever wins the 2020 presidential election will be sworn in on January the 20th of next year. So I believe that will be the case. And I think that we'll have a peaceful transition of power, just like we've always had in our nation's history.
Let's hope for that. Amanda, please.
I totally agree. I think there will be a peaceful transition. That doesn't mean that we have some issues in the street. We have seen a very, very worrisome activity from militias and from, I don't discard. I think we can expect problems in the street, but I think there will be a peaceful transition. And I think that we can be sure that Constitution says that for January 20th, there has to be a president, so we can be sure about that. I think we can also expect a fight in courts. We can expect that this ends up in Supreme Court, which will be interesting with this new conservative justice. It will be very controversial. So yeah, we can expect issues, but I really, really believe in American institutions, and I think there will be a very peaceful transition.
Okay, this leads me all to jump into the U.S. institutions and the Supreme Court. The Senate Judiciary Committee is scheduled for tomorrow, I believe, to vote on whether to approve Judge Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court. And that would just be 1 month only after the passing of Justice Ginsburg. And that would conform a 6-3 conservative majority in the Supreme Court. What can you say about this?
Well, that is right. So the Senate Judiciary Committee will vote tomorrow. The Judiciary Committee is comprised of 12 Republicans and 10 Democrats. And so her nomination will pass along party lines. And then on the 26th of October, which is Monday, the Senate will vote on Judge Barrett's nomination. And once again, this will be a vote that will be largely along party lines. There may be 2 Republicans that may not vote to confirm Judge Barrett, but that's not enough to stop her nomination. And that means that she will likely take her place as the 9th justice on the U.S. Supreme Court before Election Day, before November the 3rd. And so, as you just said, Ada, there will be a conservative majority on the U.S. Supreme Court for the foreseeable future. A 6-3 conservative majority of the liberal bloc comprised of three justices. But that does not necessarily mean that every case that comes before the Supreme Court will have a 6-3 margin. There are many cases, actually, in which even the liberals and the conservatives sometimes agree, not all of them, but sometimes. So you're not going to just see 6-3 votes for every case going forward. But it does change the complexion of the Supreme Court for sure, certainly on certain issues. And that's why, this phrase I'm about to say applies not only in America, but also in Spain. And that is, elections have consequences. If Hillary Clinton had won in 2016, she would have had an opportunity to name 3 justices to the U.S. Supreme Court. And then we'd be talking about something entirely different, which is a strong liberal majority on the U.S. Supreme Court. And the fact that Donald Trump won in 2016 gave him, ultimately, we didn't know it back then, but gave him an opportunity to fill 3 seats on the Supreme Court. 1 seat we knew of, that was the Antonin Scalia seat that remained vacant when the election was taking place. But this conservative majority that will be in place has many Democrats, particularly those on the far left, the progressives, saying maybe we ought to add 2 additional seats to the U.S. Supreme Court and even it up in terms of a Democratic conservative type of court and make it a fairer court, and they may call it. I don't know if that's going to happen. First of all, in order for that to happen, Joe Biden would need to win the presidency, and Democrats would need to be able to flip the U.S. Senate and put it in control of Democrats. And then who knows? Who knows? But I might add one thing. There's one justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. His name is Clarence Thomas. He's the longest serving justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. And he may retire, over the course of the next few years, which would give an opportunity for the next president to fill that vacancy. If the next president is Joe Biden, that would be an opportunity for Democrats to replace a very conservative justice with potentially a liberal justice on the U.S. Supreme Court. So there are a lot of unknowns here as it relates to the high court, the highest court in the land.
Yeah, the fact that the justices' mandates are for a lifetime make them very powerful, but at the same time also very independent from the governments. And historically, we have seen many justices in the Supreme Court swinging from very conservative positions to liberal positions, and or at least to centrist positions. And for instance, the equal marriage is possible in all the U.S. because one of the supposed conservative justices decided with the liberal ones. So that happens. And one has to be here to realize how important is the Supreme Court for the voters. I was shocked 4 years ago when many Republican voters didn't really like the guy. I mean, they didn't really like too much President Trump, but they say, okay, but I want low taxes and I want conservative justices at the Supreme Court. So I'm going to vote for him despite, oh my God, how this guy won the Republican primaries. And at the end of the day, the Republican voters are very pragmatic. I mean, maybe Trumpism has been a little bit overrepresented by the media, because when you want to talk with Republican voters, what do? You go to a Trump rally or you go to a Republican club meeting, and there are the strongest believers. It's like if to talk about conservative voters in Spain, you go to a Popular Party meeting, a Popular Party rally. So you got, the biggest followers. The average Republican voter, who made possible Trump's win, are not so Trumpist, not so enthusiastic about Trump, but they wanted conservative justices. And that was something that was very highlighted 4 years ago.
Thank you. As we are running to the end of the event, I want to quickly, I have two other important questions to ask you. Transatlantic relations, which are very important, of course, for us and for our members. How will they be over the next 4 years? How does it look for trade and business in the EU? And in Spain in particular, if in the case that Biden wins, or in the case that there's continuism with President Trump?
Well, this is a great question, Ada, and it's a question actually that I asked the president just a few weeks ago. I interviewed the president for Fox Television on September the 9th, and the way that I phrased the question, I asked the president, if you win another 4 years, will you, and this is the phrase that I used, will you mend fences with Europe? And typically when I ask a question of the president and I have a turn of the phrase, he'll repeat that phrase back in his answer. And that's not what happened when he answered my question. He did not say that he will mend fences with Europe. He said that his policies have worked well for the United States. He said that his economic policies have worked well for the U.S., and he also said that his trade and tariff policies have worked well for the U.S. And so if Donald Trump is elected on November the 3rd, if he wins another 4 years, I would not expect him to change any of his trade policies towards Europe. I would not expect him to all of a sudden remove the tariffs that are being applied to so many European products, as well as imported steel and aluminum. I would expect those policies to continue. And the one thing that I think the president not only is reluctant to do, I don't think he will do, again, if he's elected to 4 more years, is to impose tariffs on European manufactured automobiles. I think that's the line in the sand that he will not cross. He will not go down that road, despite the fact that he's threatened this so many times. As far as former Vice President Joe Biden, I think that he's an internationalist, and he sees value in having a strong US-EU relationship. I think that to a large extent, the relationship that existed during the Obama years would return during a Joe Biden presidency. I would expect that many of these tariffs that have been imposed upon Europe over the course of the past 4 years would be removed, including those tariffs on imported aluminum and steel. And so, based upon that, obviously, for your AmCham members, they should keep that in mind as we look at what's going to happen in 13 days or so. Each of these candidates, Biden and Trump, have very different views about the importance, or in the case of President Trump, the lack of importance of the European Union.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree that Biden's presidency will change a lot of things regarding transatlantic relationships. My question is, what will happen on the other side? Because what about the confidence of American allies? Will it be recovered like that? Because what an European ally has seen is that all these established codes, all these rules that didn't change no matter the president, can be reversed. And I think the confidence from the allies is something that will not be so easy to recover. Obviously, they will be there, but I think there will be always this feeling that things have changed forever, that maybe in 4 years, you are going to be like you were with President Trump. And yeah, I think Biden's presidency is going to change a lot of stuff. I cannot say the same regarding China. Obviously, the strategy will be different. And obviously, the language will be different. But I think that the strongest stance from the US regarding China is going to be kept.
Okay, we have here a very interesting question from one of our attendees that he asks, what happens if President Trump doesn't win the election? Which role do you expect him to play in US politics going forward?
Well, it's such speculation, because we have to go down the road that he's not going to win, number one, which may or may not occur. And then what does he do? He's always talked about how he had such a great life before he entered politics. So I would imagine that he'd go back to enjoying his life as head of the Trump organization. And I think that he'd still play a very important role in the Republican Party. Particularly if it's a close election and he loses by just a small margin. And already you see Republicans that serve in this administration, as well as the president's allies in Congress, preparing to run in 2024, preparing to essentially pick up the mantle of President Trump in 2024. And so, to use that phrase that Amanda just used, which is Trumpism. I don't know exactly how that is defined. Different people may define it differently. But Trumpism, I think, even if the president is defeated, it continues in the form of certain candidates that are hoping to pick up that mantle and run for president in 2024, win the Republican presidential nomination in 2024, and hopefully, for their part, win the White House back in 2024. So there are certainly a lot of unknowns over the course of the next 13 days, let alone the course of the next 4 years.
Thank you. Amanda, the floor is yours. And also if you want to elaborate a bit on what you understand for Trumpism.
Well, it's this cult around the person. And also I think that politically speaking is very linked to what was the Tea Party. So I mean that by Trumpism, like the cult around the leader, specifically the leader, and not so much about the traditional Republican values, let's say that. And I think this Trumpism will survive after Trump. But if he loses big, I think the message will be very important. Will be very important also in Europe, by the way, for many parties and many political leaders that try to follow this Trump's kind of leadership. It will be a strong message. So Trumpism will survive, and it will make noise for sure. But if he loses big, I think the message for the Republican Party will be strong too. And if he loses closed and tight, the message will be very different. So then the next leader may be another Trump. We don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, and actually, you know, the tendency is that normally incumbents get reelected. So we'll see what happens. So one final question, unless John, you want to elaborate a bit on what Amanda just said.
No, I agree with everything that she just said, and I think she has great insight there. If the president does lose by a large margin, then a lot of the president's sort of way of his approach will not be followed by other Republicans. I think that you'll see an approach that is more establishment in its approach towards both domestic policy and foreign policy. But I agree with everything that Amanda just said.
Good. Okay, one final question that I have for both of you. Tomorrow, there's the second presidential debate. The first one was very, very heated. What can we expect for tomorrow?
Well, I think in actuality, I think we can expect a repeat of what you saw in debate number one. Now, there's a change, the change being that while one candidate is speaking, the other candidate's mic is muted. That's the only change associated with this second presidential and final presidential debate. But once they finish that 2-minute amount of time of speaking, there's going to be a back and forth between the candidates. And there you're going to see both Donald Trump and Joe Biden talking over one another. For President Trump, he by nature is a type A personality. He is an aggressive person. And I just don't see how he can tone it down. That's just not his style. And he's looking at the same polls that you and I are looking at, which seem to indicate that he's trailing former Vice President Joe Biden. So he needs to do something to shake things up. And so in all honesty, I expect some of that chaos that we saw in debate number one to also be present in tomorrow night's debate.
Thank you, Linda.
I expect pretty the same regarding the debate, and regarding the effects, I don't know. I think, again, most of the voters are already decided, and I think it will do something at the news cycle for a few days, but we will not see a very different Trump, and we will not see a very different Biden. So I think it's not going to change a lot of things.
Okay, we're going to be paying a lot of attention on that debate and all what happens in the upcoming next week until November 3rd. And again, before finishing the event, thank you both to you, Amanda and John, for your time today, sharing your insights on what it is to be covering this election and all what you have shared with us. And I'll just leave the floor to my chairman, Jaime, in case he just wants to say the final word.
Thank you very much. We have learned a lot. It has been very interesting times, as I said before. Thank you, Amanda, and thank you, John. Thank you for having these nice pictures of Rafa Nadal in your. I think I imagine is your office. You are not in Pennsylvania. And I have a question. This racket is from Rafa Nadal, or is just a tennis racket you have put there for?
It's from, I believe, the second greatest clay court player of all time, Bjorn Borg. That's from Bjorn Borg.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Jaime. Thanks for putting together a great event.
Thank you very much.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you.